Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to my colleagues for the indulgence. It does only take one good North Dakotan to represent the entire state, so I spread myself fairly thin, Mr. Secretary. So I thank the members, and I also, Mr. Secretary, want to thank you not only for being here, but for at least agreeing to, if not joyfully, although I think you're a joyful person, to holding one of the listening sessions in North Dakota. I know it was a late request and it was a late addition to the agenda for you and Secretary Fox and others, but I thoroughly enjoyed the time that you were out there. And I notice in the QER there's a lot of reference to things that you learned last August in North Dakota, especially as it pertains to the transportation infrastructure. And some of the challenges particularly reflected are the challenges for the railroads that move multiple commodities, as you know. And you heard quite clearly, and I think again indicated in the report quite clearly, that there were challenges. But at the same time, I think one of the things I want to do, I think, is sort of bring the record up to date a little bit. Last August, we were following on two record winters and two bumper crops, two seasons in a row. That strained the infrastructure for sure for agricultural commodities. I think one of the bigger challenges was the fact that not only was it a record crop or a bumper crop, but it was a late harvest. It was due to weather. It was also a late and a very wet harvest. And so there was a consolidation of all of those commodities and the additional moisture creating other transportation problems like the movement of propane, for example, for grain drying. That perfect storm created incredible stress on the infrastructure, and along with, of course, 700,000 or so barrels per day of oil being moved by rail. So there's a fair bit of, there was a lot of criticism last August. There's a fair bit of that reflected in the report, but just in the last 10 months, the storm has sort of shifted, I think, and I want to stress some of those points, but also encourage you and the team to continue to monitor it on a very regular basis, because some of the things that were identified have worked. I mean, the STB's weekly, the requirement for the weekly reports, for example, by the Class 1 railroads has been very helpful in transparency, allowed better planning. A warmer winter with a more traditional harvest season, and frankly lower commodity prices have created more normalcy, and during which time, and I can be the railroad's worst nightmare, but I also want to acknowledge when they have done their part. And I have to say, for BNSF, which is obviously our largest railroad by far, they have invested mightily in personnel, locomotive energy, cars, and certainly double tracking much of the Bakken region and much of the upper Midwest. And I want to be sure that the record is clear, but I also want to again encourage you to remain flexible and update the report regularly to acknowledge that this robust infrastructure does exist, and it's my hope and my expectation that additional and more robust rail infrastructure actually enhances all commodities. I also think it's worth noting that because of the STB reports, we've noticed that they are pretty well caught up, not just pretty well caught up, but caught up to the point where there's extra capacity. And much like the electrical grid, it doesn't hurt to have a little extra capacity, but it also creates opportunity for growth. So, I would only probably ask that, for you to comment on my comments if you'd like to, but again, express my appreciation for your attention to the issues.
Well, thank you. And we certainly appreciated, by the way, your participation in the QER field hearing in North Dakota, along with your Senate colleagues. First of all, I think you've put your finger on really what was the main driver of our discussion on this subject in the QER, and that was the need for more data. To be perfectly honest, the railroads have not always been the most transparent in terms of data availability, and I think that's certainly been improved. And certainly the issues around coal, for example, have been certainly relieved. There are other issues, as we know, in terms of oil by rail that are being addressed, and I might say that with the Department of Transportation, we have now launched the next phase of the study of relevance to crude properties and rail. It'll take about 18 months before we're ready with that. But anyway, I think you're absolutely right. We've had some progress on the data front, and that allows, and EIA, by the way, is playing a role in there as well.
Yes, they are, yes.
So it's great.
Well, thank you, and thank you again, Mr. Chairman.